Hello, class. We are the Achievers. For our leadership comparison paper, we decided to compare the leadership of Adolf Hitler and Martin Luther King Jr. We hope you enjoy our presentation and look forward to reading your comments. While the subjects of math and science have been taught for centuries, the study of leadership has been a relatively new area of exploration for academic review. In fact, when reviewing criticisms of the many theories and approaches regarding leadership, a common underlying issue that is repeatedly discussed is that there is still much research to be done to validate and strengthen the accuracy of these theories and approaches. In the pursuit of the study of leadership, the analysis of actual leaders can serve as a wonderful supplement to better enhance an individual's understanding of leadership. In this spirit, our team has decided to compare two major leaders that have left a large impact on society. This presentation will analyze the backgrounds and the effectiveness of the leaders Adolf Hitler and Martin Luther King Jr. Their leadership will be reviewed and compared through the prism of the course material covered in this course in order to better illustrate the differences between effective and ineffective leaders. Adolf Hitler was the head of the Nazi Party in Germany beginning in 1921 and rose to prominence when he was appointed as Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Upon his appointment as Chancellor, he transformed Germany into a dictatorship. Much of Hitler's behavior as a leader was on full display as he began to lead the Nazi Party. He would rarely trust any advisors and displayed a dominant approach to leadership. He was ruthless and believed that ultimate authority began with him and only trickled downward under his control. Hitler held beliefs that were utterly abhorrent and resulted in the deaths of millions of individuals. Hitler espoused claims of how the Aryan race was superior amongst all other races and that individuals who were Jewish were the root cause of the world's problems. Though Hitler's viewpoints and philosophy were utterly cruel, Hitler enjoyed many successes as a leader. The various external forces that were at play after World War I, as will be discussed later in this presentation, served as cannon fodder that allowed Hitler to amass a large group of support for the Nazi Party. Hitler was able to use these forces and his oratory skills to obtain power over the German government and to procure support for a military conquest. Hitler's war machine was able to dominate many European countries and much of North Africa. Through alliances with Italy and Japan, known as the Axis forces, Hitler and his allies came to conquer and occupy a sizable portion of the world. Hitler lost the war once America and the other Allied forces worked together in the war, and Hitler's many genocidal war crimes were discovered as various parts of Europe were being liberated.
Martin Luther King Jr. was a leader of the civil rights movement from the 1950s until 1968. He was a Baptist minister and social activist who led the movement for African Americans in the United States to have equal rights to the American white man. His demeanor throughout the movement led to success for the African Americans in gaining rights in the United States. King exhibited nonviolent, charismatic behavior at the time of his leadership. King's Christian upbringing and seminary schooling deeply influenced who he became as a leader. He used his Christian beliefs as a basis for his ethical protest. He believed that every life mattered, which guided him to lead in a way that was different from others who protested. He believed in respect for every individual, no matter what the skin color, and that every human had worth. He believed that segregation was not a display of equality among humans. He wanted his children to grow up in a place where people would be respected for who they were and not for their physical features. As a leader of the civil rights movement, King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. He addressed issues such as discrimination by skin color and that people should come together as individuals to join hands and share in the same experiences. There are many things that Martin Luther King Jr. was known for during the time as a civil rights leader. However, he was not always a perfect example. Years after he wrote his dissertation, he was accused of plagiarism. The committee that reviewed his report blamed King for not crediting or mistakenly crediting his sources of information. Despite the faults during his dissertation, Martin Luther King Jr. went on to be an influential leader whose legacy still lives on today.
The behavioral approach places emphasis on the task and relationship behaviors of a leader. According to our textbook, the leadership grid was created to show how leaders help others reach their purposes through concern for people and for production. Beginning with Hitler, we know he gained power in the 30s. His main purpose was to gain full control. He was aggressive, his influence killed millions of people, and he had the 9-1 authority-compliant style of leadership, which emphasizes tasks and requirements of the job. He was less concerned with people, he used them as tools to achieve his purpose, and he did not communicate with his followers to build a trusting relationship. He gave orders and was only focused on results. In contrast, Martin Luther King Jr. rose to leadership in the 50s. He led the civil rights movement. He stood for freedom and equality, was calm and peaceful, and he had the 9-9 team management style of leadership, which focuses equally on interpersonal relationships and tasks. It fosters a high level of teamwork and participation. Martin Luther King Jr. behaved open-mindedly and was passionate about the cause. Both used task and relationship behaviors in two different ways, one for evil and one for good.
The situational approach focuses on different demands of leadership in specific situations. The two types of situational leadership behaviors are supportive and directive. Supportive behaviors help group members feel comfortable, while directive behaviors help group members accomplish goals. When faced with the task of being an effective leader, certain situations require specific actions, and knowing what action to take is vital to the leader's success. Adolf Hitler. The Nazi Party was the beginning of Hitler's leadership role. In this situation, Hitler used a high directive and low supportive behavior. He would often tell his followers what to do and would rarely take advice from others because he believed his methods were the best. Hitler gave direction to his followers but never showed them how to follow through with his commands or offered support. Hitler's followers were not treated with respect, but he still expected them to do as he saw fit. Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was a leader leading a harsh era for our country. Individuals were not sure who to follow or what to do during this specific time, and King stepped up and used his high directive, high supportive leadership behavior. He knew that civilians needed a leader, and he stepped up to take on this role. He started by offering emotional support to show civilians that he and others were suffering through the same tragedy. This support allowed individuals to feel comfortable and trust his judgment as a leader. King was committed to doing what he believed was the best for people. He was leading and did everything in his power to motivate them to strive for what he knew was right. Civilians might not have made much progress without him because they did not feel comfortable or were afraid to stand up for themselves in fear of what could happen to them. King allowed individuals to have the support they needed while also establishing a direction to achieve a common goal.
Transformational leaders inspire, encourage, and motivate followers to change for a greater good, and the result of it is performance beyond expectations. Adolf Hitler was a very ineffective leader. He focused more on his ego, rank, and power, and used his coercive power to lead. He obviously lacked morals. He was also what they call pseudo-transformational, meaning he was a transformational leader, but in a very damaging way. Martin Luther King Jr., on the other hand, was a very strong role model, charismatic leader. He was articulate with his ideological goals that have moral overtones. He found a way to motivate and inspire in a very meaningful way, and he bravely faced threats and diffused dangers. He was obviously a great example of a transformational leader.
There were a multitude of external factors at play after the ending of World War I that allowed Hitler to rise to power and conquer other nations. The Treaty of Versailles, the document that ended the First World War, has been seen by historians as a catalyst that led to the development of the Second World War. Under this treaty, Germany's economy was left in shambles by having to pay many reparations for the First World War. With the German people desperate for a change in fortune, Hitler was able to take advantage of the frustrations that were held by Germans and convince his countrymen that he would be able to make Germany a superpower within the world again. The dire state of the German economy created an environment where certain psychological factors were allowed to breed in the minds of the German people, which made them susceptible to accepting a toxic leader. For example, Hitler was able to attract followers because he acted as a stable authority figure. His racist ideology also made many of the German people feel special and superior to others. It was from Germany's terrible economic status and Hitler's manipulation via his oratory skills that allowed him to promote the Nazi Party to power. A second factor at play that allowed Hitler to conquer so much of Europe and North Africa was the United States' neutrality. Hitler was allowed to occupy nation after nation, and his aggression was consistently left unchecked. This allowed Hitler to commit pervasive human rights violations and enhanced his ability to carry out the Holocaust. It was not until the United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor that the United States government declared war on the Axis powers, which eventually led to the collapse of the forces of Hitler and his allies. Hitler's ruthless and violent military conquest led to a major worldwide military conflict in which many individuals perished through the genocidal actions of Hitler and through much of the fighting that had occurred during the war. The loss of life is something that is still relatively tangible to see. There are Holocaust museums around the world and also here locally in the Houston area that may be visited. These museums and the multiple monuments dedicated to remembering those who were lost in the war reminds us of how harsh this war was and the effect that evil ideologies can have on society. This conflict and the events that surround it are still consistently spoken of today and still have an impact on society. New military strategies, advanced weaponry technology, and the recognition of the importance of protecting human rights are some of the many major items that stemmed from this war and are still relevant to society in these modern times. As an example, the world's deadliest weapon, the atomic bomb, was developed during World War II. Today, the topic of nuclear weapons is still a hotly debated topic, and nuclear weapons are still discussed regularly in the news cycles. Some of the most recent stories were the reports of North Korea conducting tests for their nuclear missile program.
There were many external factors that Martin Luther King Jr. faced when leading the civil rights movement. First, there were social tensions caused by pervasive racial prejudice throughout America. Segregation was a growing concern in the United States for those that felt unimportant to the everyday American. Martin Luther King Jr. became a significant leader in the time that was difficult for African Americans to have a voice. He became the voice for many who struggled with feeling secluded, neglected, and unvalued as humans. He believed that despite the living situation in America, all men and women, despite of race, should be treated equally. His nonviolent demeanor attracted thousands of followers, all who wanted racial prejudice to end. Another external factor that Martin Luther King Jr. faced was the tensions created by migration during the time of the Civil Rights Movement. Many of these workers wanted out of the southern United States. They were tired of being treated like slaves and wanted to live in a place where they felt valued. Since African Americans were seeking ways to escape, the tensions in the South arose between the two races. With pressures rising, King was leading the movement for change during a very difficult time. The civil rights movement had a positive effect on society. King's dream of African Americans having the same rights as white men and women became a reality. The Civil Rights Act was signed in 1964, which outlawed discrimination based on race and other demographics. African Americans were given equality by being allowed into schools for whites, being able to use the same bathrooms as whites, and were able to keep their seats when riding public transportation. The signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 allowed for African Americans to feel respected and important. It became a turning point in the United States and has influenced many generations since its signing.
After investigating these two leaders, the team has learned that leadership can be used for both good and evil. People that hold a powerful leadership position have the opportunity to make a profound difference, but some abuse the power for their own agendas. Another important lesson is that leadership comes in a lot of different forms and can be analyzed from a lot of different theories. We discovered that some of the leadership behaviors are learned and some are innate. It was also an eye-opening how two completely different leaders can use and abuse their powers and the impact their leaders has on followers. Leadership should be used to motivate others to be their best and do their best. It should not be selfish and self-centered. Leaders can achieve their goals in different ways, regardless of the morality of the direction in which they lead their team. While striving to be a good leader, it is not bad in itself. It is not sufficient to look at leadership in a vacuum. To become a truly effective leader that leaves a legacy that others will admire, it is important to understand the various approaches to leadership that can make one an effective leader and also understand the perception of how followers and observers will view them ethically and the morality, the decisions that leaders make. The achievers leave you with this question: what is one thing you've learned about being an effective leader?